Hello. Let us start with the beginner's perspective, as I am quite new to the digital editing comparative to my predecessor. The purpose of my talk today is to present a quite, I think, successful attempt by a traditional paper-based editor, that is me, to enter the world of digital editing. The paper is divided into 3 sections. The initial part would provide a concise overview of the phenomenon of Ruthenian song, as I am going to tell you something what exactly is this Ruthenian songs. The Ruthenian is Ruski in Polish, and is historically relating to today's Ukrainian and Belarus lands and their language, mixed language in the 17th, 18th century, often combined with Polish. As a component of the popular literature of the Polish-Ruthenian borderland during the 17th and 18th century. The second section will address the circumstances that led me to engage in digital editing at a considerably more advanced level than I had initially anticipated. And the third part will be devoted to the actual digital edition of early modern Ruthenian songs, which I was able to complete this year. The early modern Ruthenian popular poetry, how do I do it? Like this. Popular poetry written in Latin alphabet constitutes part of the literary heritage of the Polish-Ruthenian cultural borderland. Yet the field of study has remained relatively obscure due to the dispersion of sources, which can be mainly found in Polish manuscripts of the Silver Rerum type. As a result, it has not entered the historical and literary circulation and has remained on the periphery of research on popular literature of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Polish early modern society considered Ruthenian culture as a regional variant of their own. This was especially applicable to Ruthenian popular poetry, widely recognized among Polish literary audience, who highly appreciated melodious, lyrical, and emotional tone of the Ruthenian language. General acclaim of Ruthenian songs has been reflected in their democratic presence across all layers of the noble society, from Sarmatian manors of the Polish-Ruthenian borderlands to aristocratic and royal courts. The expansion of the Ruthenian song throughout the Commonwealth was possible mainly owing to the Latin alphabet. The language, style, and themes of Ruthenian songs were creatively repurposed by Polish authors as means of influence on both Ruthenian and non-Ruthenian recipients. They are diverse in terms of literary motifs, such as love poetry, elegies, political satires, religious works, folk songs, etc., and composition, acrostic, strophic, and stacchic verse. Alongside manuscript collections appeared prints, usually political pamphlets and religious songbooks. One of the political prints is presented on the slides. It is a rhymed account of the Battle of Beresteczko in 1651. Prints of this type have hardly survived to our times. This one is a unique copy. The prints contained single Ruthenian songs, which were quite popular, subsequently entering permanent circulation. The confessional affiliation of religious Ruthenian songs is often difficult to determine, and their heterogeneous language and script make clear classifications impossible. In general, Ruthenian literary works were usually connected with Cyrillic alphabet as natural means of notation and consequently assigned to cultures of the Eastern Slavic nations. They aroused the biggest research interest at the turn of the 19th and 20th century, as the time of the formation and realization of the independence aspirations of the Polish, Belarusian, and Ukrainian people. Researchers focused mainly on their national classification. Polish literary scholars considered the songs to be the effects of the stylization skills of Polish authors. Ukrainian scholars saw them as Ukrainian folk songs, while Belarusian scholars perceived them as simply Belarusian. Recent and still quite rare studies pertaining to Ruthenian songs focus on their borderline feature rather than their Polishness, Belarusianness, and Ukrainianness. In Ukrainian literary studies of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, not much interest was spared to Ruthenian songs, even though the Ruthenian religious song constitute the oldest monuments of Ukrainian literary culture recorded in writing. They were considered adaptations of Polish works and thus foreign. The comeback of religious Ruthenian song and its recognition as a separate genre of Baroque Ukrainian literature occurred only at the end of the 20th century, when research on Ukrainian devotional song of the 17th-18th centuries resumed. According to researchers, religious songs were most likely to be found in Cyrillic manuscripts, such as songbook and the collections of liturgical texts. Manuscripts of Polish provenance, which included texts written in Latin script, or devotional prints containing Ruthenian songs, as seen on the slide, were referred to sporadically, using mainly bibliographical clues left by earlier generations of researchers. This left out an important part of the Ruthenian early modern song heritage. Ruthenian popular poetry has also been largely overlooked by Polish scholars. The songs have been identified as a literary phenomenon that coexisted with Polish popular poetry, but due to the limited number of surviving texts, broader research in this area has not been undertaken. The principal factors contributing to this situation were the significant divergence of the texts across the manuscripts and their challenging legibility. On this slide, we see pages from a prayer book written by the hand of a Benedictine nun from Lviv in 17th century. The left page and the upper part of the right page contain Polish poems. The Ruthenian poem starts from the middle of the right page. The Latin script of Ruthenian songs may be confusing. They can be easily mistaken for Polish poems. Sometimes only scrutiny or even reading the text out loud may help to differentiate which is which. The slide displays a Ruthenian song with a Polish title. It is here, as I will try to indicate to this. I'm talking about this part precisely. The slide displays a Ruthenian song with a Polish title presented in 4 columns. The confusing factor is that the text is written in the same hand as the Polish poems above and the Polish document below. An additional complicating issue was the relative limited number of texts themselves. My own experience of a search in the manuscript collections of Polish cultural institutions may serve as an illustrative example. The search carried out for my PhD dissertation revealed the extent of the dispersion of the songs and thus the statistically small number of texts. During the query, circa 150 Ruthenian songs were found, but to find them, over 800 manuscripts had to be overviewed. Eventually, Ruthenian songs could be found in only 35 manuscripts, of which only 1 is a large and uniform songbook containing, among Polish poetical works, 84 Ruthenian secular poems. This unique item comes from the collections of the Princess Czartoryski Library in Kraków. The remaining songs occur either as standalone items or in small groups, with the latter being organized in several ways. Thematically, for example, ritual wedding songs, formally, for example, acrostic poems, or randomly without a clear intention. Other larger collections of Ruthenian poems were lost during the Second World War, including 2 large manuscript songbooks from the historical Załuski Library, retrieved from Petrograd after the Peace of Riga and burned during the Warsaw Uprising. The popularity of the Ruthenian songs is evidenced also by their 19th century transmission as recorded by Polish folklorists, among them the most famous Oskar Kolberg, who worked in Volhynia, Belarus, Red Ruthenia, and the areas around Sanok and Krosno in today's Poland. Of course, they are subject to modifications at different formal and semantic levels, depending on the degree of understanding of the original content. However, there are variants that are almost identical to the accounts found in the 18th century manuscripts. In December 2022, I have received a National Science Center Preludium grant for the project Early Modern Popular Ruthenian Song Written in Latin Script, a borderland literary phenomenon of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which is amplification of my doctoral thesis concerning the traditional edition of Ruthenian songs retrieved from manuscripts. Over the course of the 3-year grant period, I planned to expand the existing corpus of Ruthenian songs by identifying the new texts from the collections of cultural institutions in Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine. According to my preliminary query, several songbooks containing Ruthenian songs written in Latin script still wait to be rediscovered there. All texts, both those published as part of the PhD and new texts acquired as a result of grant searches, were to be published in form of a digital edition. At the time of the grant application, the digital edition was an abstract being to me, and an extension of the standard edition, which could of course be an interesting variety and a certain novelty in the world of traditional editing of texts of early modern Polish literature. Reality, however, forced a change of plans. The outbreak of the war in Ukraine made queries on both Ukrainian and Belarusian collections impossible. Moreover, the search for Ruthenian songs in the Vilnius collections yielded rather disappointing results. Despite the examination of several dozen manuscripts, only approximately 10 Ruthenian songs could be identified. By the end of 2023, it had already become clear that more attention should be given in my project to digital editing as the best possible way to make the research material I had collected widely available. And because of my traditional editing experience, I felt that I should consider digital editing as the next level of presenting the phenomenon of Ruthenian song to the public. Given the rarity of digital editorial projects related to early modern poetry carried out by Polish scholarly institutions, it became necessary to draw upon the expertise of foreign specialists. As an additional factor necessary for the proper realization of the set goal, I considered the necessity to have experience in the digital editing of texts written in the Slavic language, but in Latin script, as this is also the specific feature of Ruthenian songs. In my search for a suitable institution, I was assisted by a genuine chain of people of goodwill, members of the digital editing community well known to all of us here, whom I would like to thank most sincerely at this point. Professor Bartłomiej Śleszyński, Professor Anna Skolimowska, together with Magdalena Turska, who personally and without hesitation indicated Dr. Matija Ogrin, head of the Institute of Slovenian Literature and Literary Studies, Research Center of the Slovenian Academy of Sciences and Art in Ljubljana, as the most suitable professional with great experience in the digital editing of early modern poetical texts. Among various projects run by the Institute of Slovenian Literature, later referred as the Institute, One project in particular, the Slovenian Baroque literature, appeared specifically suitable and comparable, especially in terms of its approach to heterogeneous Slavic texts written in Latin script. Dr. Oglin familiarized himself with my research material, acknowledged the similarities of my edition with regard to time period and methods, and agreed to host me for a one-month research stay, thus beginning my and my Ruthenian songs adventure in digital editing. The work on the digital edition began with the thorough introduction to the methods and procedures used in the Institute for editing and publishing electronic critical editions of early modern literary texts, with the help of open standards of textual markup, Unicode XML and TI guidelines. The workflow consisted of 3 phases. Phase 1 was devoted to editing of the TI XML document. As my material was intended for a traditional printed edition, its conversion into a modern digital edition had to be done practically from scratch, starting with appropriate processing of MS Word files created by me. A set of predefined MS Word styles was imported into the transcription of the Ruthenian songs. This allowed a map to be made of the entire document containing the individual verses with styles identifying further categories of text structure, for example, thematic categories, song titles, lines, and line groups. The various modules of the edition were also defined at this stage: the title page, the editorial page, the introduction to the edition, and the main corpus of texts. After extensive editing to mark basic text structures for conversion, the file was then converted to TI XML format. The conversion used the research infrastructure that was applied in the development of the aforementioned editions at the Institute. For advanced editing of TI markup, the Oxygen XML editor was installed on my computer, and subsequently I underwent training in its practical application. The next step was to carry out extensive editing of text critical structures, deletions, additions, lacunas, conjectures. The validity of XML was constantly checked against a schema used for the editions of the Slovenian Baroque literature. On the slide we see the 2 initial fragments of XML files. The top one is an edition of Ruthenian songs. The lower one is the edition of the songbook from the Sveta Planina made by Dr. Ogrin. Both editions use the same schema developed for the use of Slovenian Baroque literature project. The traditional edition was arranged according to a thematical criterion. This was due to the need to compile a monograph on Ruthenian songs for the purposes of the doctoral thesis. However, the digital edition has different requirements, so I have proposed an altered layout in relation to the original. The TI document of the Ruthenian songs was marked up and reorganized by primary sources rather than by thematic arrangement. Further elements of the traditional edition, that is the description of sources, the primary sources, the transcription principles, and the textual commentaries that had been elaborated in advance, were also structured and integrated into the edition. Then a typology of literary genres of Ruthenian songs was created, encoded, and inserted into the TI header section of the document. Consequently, for each poem, its genre was encoded according to the typology for the purposes of browsing and searching in the final edition. And finally, the following thematic categories of Ruthenian songs were identified: historical and political songs, social and satirical songs, religious songs, wedding songs, folk love songs, courtly love songs, common songs, and humorous and obscene songs. While working on the XML file, various problems arose that required a different approach to that of traditional editing. For example, how to mark lines indicating the melody of a given text, or what the degree of detail in the description of variants should be, as well as the issue of the introduction of an extensive critical apparatus into the edition. The critical apparatus I have produced consists of 50 pages of text in MS Word. Phase 2 concerned the application of GitHub repository for secure data storage and versioning. To ensure a reliable and secure workflow, a GitHub repository to control the material and coding practices was set up. Authentication of security mechanism was implemented for daily work, which consisted of cycles of Git commands to track changes, upload the files to the cloud, etc. This stage was almost entirely related to the work on introducing the critical apparatus. Its precision has worked out well for the digital edition, as it has been possible to obtain a clearer pictures of changes introduced into the text than the case of traditional edition. The highest priority was to present a reading transcription, while indicating the perceived errors in the original have been corrected. So the most frequent choice was to use the correction indicated throughout. Phase 3 engaged TI Publisher as a publication framework. We have imported the digital edition of Ruthenian songs encoded in TI XML format into the software framework of Slovenian Baroque literature. To this end, we installed the ExistDB database and uploaded the application containing the edition to the database. This framework still needs to be further adapted to the edition's needs, but the basic production cycle has been achieved and settled. The digital edition of the Ruthenian songs is now a work in progress. Once the Ruthenian songs application is completed, it will be possible to publish it on the internet or any public server where the Exist database is installed. What is left to be done for the end? Firstly, the descriptive part of the edition. For instance, the summary should be improved. It has been assumed that the main language of the edition is Polish. However, given the multilingualism of the source material and its potential usefulness for researchers of early modern popular Belarusian and Ukrainian literature, it will be beneficial to expand the share of English language in the edition. The extent to which it should be done remains an open question. Another question is introducing the comments and deciding on which layout they should be presented to the recipient. The comments section takes up about 70 MS Word pages in my edition. The experience of digital editions to date has shown that incorporation of digital facsimile alongside individual poems is a must. I have obtained scans of all poems I have currently working on, and it is evident that the edition benefits considerably from their inclusion. An illustrative example is the Kochanovius Latinus project carried out at the Faculty of Polish Studies at the Jagiellonian University. Another challenging issue I see is the introduction of notes of a comparative nature. For example, comparing a similar phenomenon in the form of references to specific verse numbers from the commentary. It would be beneficial to consider including references to Ruthenian songs that were published, for example, in the 19th century by Oskar Kolberg. This is because a significant proportion of the 17th, 18th century Ruthenian songs also functioned in later times. Last but not least, let me once again most sincerely thank Dr. Materia Ogrin for his personal and selfless support, professional training and commitment to the creation of a fully structured and encoded digital edition that complies with TI guidelines and is independent of hardware and software. Without his work, enhanced and by support of Magdalena Turska, providing the final finishing touch by inserting the edition of Ruthenian songs into the Slovenian Baroque literature framework, the undertaking of such an ambitious task would be impossible. So, thank you very much.